Hi, this is Mike Hibbert back with the third part of the Python Django tutorials. This time we're going to cover the subject of views, and to do that I'm going to give you a few examples of how to actually construct views. But first of all, what are views? Views are functions that we use to describe how to display the information of a web page when we visit a URL. So for instance, if we went to a view called hello, we get our standard page from Django. Our view helps us to know how to display other information other than what's on the standard page. So for instance, in the case of perhaps something like eBay, for instance, there's a certain page that you go to that shows you what your personal settings are and your information. There's a page that shows search results on certain subjects, and all of those have different URLs, and those different URLs have different functions, and that's basically what views are. They're different views of the data and information of the system that's behind our website. So how do we declare a view? Well, the main way that we do that is inside of our Python packages for our Django system. We've created an article package, which we did in our last tutorial. Now inside of there, as well as having a models file, which is what we declared last time and we demonstrated, we have a views file, and these are views that relate to this particular article package that we've created, or module. So inside of there we can declare different functions that can describe how different pages from article can be displayed. So the first very basic example that I'm going to show you is inside of that views. We're going to declare a very basic view that just displays a little message based on a string that we're going to generate. To do that, we need to import the HTTP response class from Django HTTP, and the reason for that is that our function, in this case we're going to call it hello, takes a request from the web server, then it does a little bit of stuff in between, and then it passes back some HTML in our HTTP response class, and then Django knows how to then pass that back to the web browser. So what are we going to do? Well, we're just basically taking a variable called name, which equals Mike, and we're going to embed it inside of an HTML variable, which is just a string filled with bog standard HTML, and we're inserting the name into here. So it should read, "Hi Mike, this seems to have worked." And that's the very basics of how that view should work. Now, because we're dealing with a web server, we need to declare the URL that will handle this view, so that when people go to our website and they type in something like hello, the web server knows which one of our view functions to call. So to do that, we go into our URLs file, which is contained inside of our project Django test. That's the file there. So notice that it's not inside of our article, it's inside of our Django test, which is the project name. This is our app and this is our project. You could include some URLs in here which are specific to that, but that's a little bit more complex than I want to get into in this basic tutorial, so we'll do that in another tutorial. I'll show you how you can separate URLs out which are specific to your apps or modules. So how do we declare a URL? The first thing we do is we use the URL function, which we've already imported by default. You should see that at the beginning of your URLs file, already imported for you. And we're going to use a regular expression which basically matches the word hello with a forward slash. So if we look at our web browser, that's basically what it should match. So it matches that pattern, and when it does, it passes back to the function hello, which is inside of our views file, which is inside of our article app or package or module, or whichever word you're going to use in there. So once we've declared that, we should then be able to restart our web server, and let's do that now. And refresh that, and there we have it. It now understands that whenever someone visits that URL, that we should then generate our string and pass it back as an HTTP response. So that's a very, very basic example of how to do it. What about a little bit more complex? Well, excuse me. One of the things you might find is that you want to display a little bit more than just a string of HTML and body tags and some text in between. So how would you go about doing that? Well, the answer is to start using templates within Django. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole detail of Django templates because there isn't time in this tutorial, but in a future one I'll go into more detail. I'm just going to give you the basics of how to actually load in some HTML and put a few variables inside that would make it a bit more dynamic. So what do we do? Well, the first thing we do is we need to declare our templates, and what I've done inside of our project that's the word I'm looking for, is I've just created a templates folder. Now the templates folder basically holds currently 2 HTML files, which I'll show you later, and that's all it contains. It's just almost like a bucket that we stuff all our templates into, and we then can reference them later in the Django code. So how do we tell Django that that's where our templates are? The way that we do that is we go into our settings.py, which if you saw in our earlier examples when we set up databases, you'll see that there's a settings.py file. There's a section in there that says template _DIRS, or template directories, and this is where we're going to put an entry to show where that is on our physical file system. And in the case of mine, it's in here, and that's enough to tell Django where, when we reference the names of templates, where it will go looking to find those. It can be more than one path if you want it to be, but for the sake of this tutorial we're not going to add more than one. All you would do is add a comma on the end and yet another string to say where it is physically on your file path. Now, how do we load in a template instead of doing it this way like we did in the last example? Well, the way that we do that is we import a couple more things from our Django modules. So we go from Django module template.loader, import getTemplate. This is a little helper function that basically uses the settings.py to know where the templates are and goes off and finds them. And the second part is Django template import context. Templates have a context object, and the reason why they have that is because each template needs to be passed enough information for it to be able to insert the data that you have generated within your view in the correct place, because the template uses a special templating language and it needs that context to work along with the templating language so that it can know where to place your information and how to place it, which is the subject of another tutorial. But very basically, if I look at our hello template, we've got our open and closing body tags and HTML tags, but I've put inside of here hi, then 2 left curly braces and 2 right curly braces with the name inside of there. And that is basically us saying that in the context of this template you should be able to find a variable called name, and we want you to replace this part of our HTML with that variable's contents. And that's why we use the context class, because we're going to pass in those variables to the template and get it to render itself. So let's take a look at what the function should do. Now we've imported those two parts of the framework. The function is called hello_template, just so that it's not the same as the other one. Again, it takes a request. We've declared our variable Mike, and this time we use getTemplate to go off and say get hello.html, which is the template that we were just looking at there. Once it's gotten it, we're going to assign it to the variable t, and then we use t, or rather t's render method, to render the template with a context that contains a dict with a key of name, which contains the contents of this variable that we've just declared. Get that to render and pass it back to HTML, so at this point it's now a string of some description. And finally we do the same again. We get our HTTP response class and send that back to the web server for it to push back to the browser. So load our template, render it with our variables, and send it back to the web server. So let's restart the web server and see what happens there. We should still have our hello URL, which should work. Now we've got a hello template. Aha, so this is telling us that we haven't gone into our URLs file and we haven't told it how to route through the URL hello template through to our view. So to do that, we need to be in our URLs. We'll put this, so hello template, inside of our regular expression here. Then we say this routes to articles.views.hello template, which is this function here. And now if we restart the server, we should now find, fingers crossed, yep, there you go. So it's in, hi Mike, this template seems to have worked. Excuse me. So that's how you load in templates and have dynamic views and use HTML that people like designers or web UX experts or anybody like that might have passed to you and said, I've made this look pretty, now you program it and make it work. That's how you connect that together. Now my final part is just basically something that you may or may not find useful. These ways of doing things are the common ways, and there is an alternative way to do that, which is much more object orientated and can often make your life a little bit easier by making some of your views duplicatable by you using class inheritance. Now what do we mean by that? Well, Django supports something other than these procedural ways of displaying pages. It also supports something called class-based views. Now class-based views are basically classes that know how to render themselves, and whilst it's not really very different in terms of concepts, it does mean that if you create a view that is a class-based view, you can then inherit some of its properties into other views that you have in your project. Whereas if you had something like these, then you may find that you duplicate your code a bit. Hopefully you wouldn't do that too much, but with class-based views it becomes even more increasingly less the case. So let's take a look at a class-based view. What do we need to do to bring that in? Well, I'm going to show you the basic one, which is the templated class-based view. Just ignore that for the time being, because this is just something I want to show you later on. So to do that, we import Django views, generic base, import template view, and this is basically a view that knows how to display a template. Now, this is a class that we've declared called Hello Template, and its template member variable, or template name member variable, is set to hello_class, which is our other view, or other template rather, that we displayed. And the only difference between this one and the one before is simply that we've put some text in to say this is a class-based template, just so that we know when it renders in the web browser that it's definitely worked. Now, do you remember earlier when we were talking about contexts? We talked about contexts here. Now, in the class-based views, we still use a context, but in this way we actually declare a method on the class called GetContextData. Now that takes a variable list of keyword arguments and passes that through using our super method, which is something you may not have come across, and it's worth investigating what super is. It's an interesting subject, but I'm not going to cover it here, so if you want to know what super is, go and have a look. It basically lets us call our base class, which is template view, and get some of the information back from that base class using the keyword arguments that we're getting, which gives us our context that we previously had to create as a class. And then it allows us to insert into our context a variable called name and make it equal the string Mike. And then we just return the context, hence it's called GetContextData, because in the process of rendering this view, this class has some mechanism in the back that uses this method to pull in data. So for instance, if you were getting a list of objects out of the database, you would probably use GetContextData to get the list, push it into a variable within the current context for your template, and then pass that back. So in our URLs, we then declare a URL for this class, hello class view, and instead of doing the path articles.views.hello template, we basically import from our articles.views the hello template, and then we use hello template dot as_view, and this will return the required information for this URL to know how to display that class. So it's slightly different in the way that you call them, because here we're doing a procedural call to the hello method. Now we're doing a class-based call to hello template as view, but these are effectively the same. You're effectively calling the render, or the function that will then bring back HTML from this hello template. So with that, we should then be able to just restart our server again to get it to recompile our code. And there we go. It's rendered the class with our class-based template and inserted the variable where we needed it to be, and that seems to have worked. So that's the 3 ways of doing it. Now, what was this fourth thing that I've been trying to get you to ignore all this time? Well, the fourth thing is just to backtrack to before, when we did the hello template function. You'll notice we've got 4 lines of code here. We've got used the get template and then rendered the template and then sent the HTML response back. Well, the reason why I showed you that is because I wanted you to understand about contexts. But there is a little helper function that you can use that you don't need to actually understand about contexts. But that wouldn't have helped you to understand how our template class views would have worked. So I tried to kind of not let you get to know about that just yet. But now's the time that you should know about it, because it actually makes things much simpler if you're going to follow the procedural route. So this is the function that you need to import. It's called Django.Shortcuts. Import render to response. And this is the simplest way of doing that 4-step process. So you go make, get template, render the template with the context. In the case of using render to response, all you do is tell it what the template's called and pass it a list of arguments or variables, and it will more or less do in 2 lines of code what this function does in 4. And even then, you could probably chop off this line about name equals Mike if you wanted to, and just put that into there if you needed to, and that would make it 1 line of code. So it's just a simpler way of doing it, and you'll probably find that you use this more times than you use the other method. But like I said, I wanted you to understand that there are things like contexts and that they're needed in other ways, especially when you get to the point where you're using view templates and view classes rather. So with that, we can then put in a URL for that, point it at article views hello template simple, which is using our render to response function. And we can just go to our web server, or web page rather, get the template, and it works just as quickly and easily as the other ones, and less lines of code, which is nice, because obviously you don't want to type too much if you can get away with doing something similar. So that's the small amount of examples that I thought would be useful to you, so that you can get your head around the idea of views and how they work, how to set them up, and the couple of different ways of how you actually can render HTML back to the browser through the Django server system. So that's the end of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was informative, and if you liked this tutorial, then please click the like button. And if you want to see more examples of this and other Python based tutorials that I'm going to do in the future, then please subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.